The opening night roster is set for Thursday, but what's going on with the line combinations at practice? We're going to talk about that on today's Locked On Blue Jackets.
You're Locked On Blue Jackets, your daily podcast on the Columbus Blue Jackets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to Locked On Blue Jackets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I am, as always, your host, Jay Foster, here to give you the good, the bad, and the ugly about your favorite team and mine, the Columbus Blue Jackets. Before we get things started, I want to thank everyone for making this your first listen of the day every single day. Locked On Blue Jackets is free and available on all podcast platforms, over on YouTube and on SiriusXM. I just have to let you know that today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Place your first $5 bet, and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. And we're going to get started with some confirmation, some questions, all of that good stuff. You know, they set the opening night roster. It's basically exactly what I predicted yesterday. There was one singular move that needed to be made. They made it. They sent James Malatesta down to the Monsters, which is fine. I'm fine with that. Bringing in Zach Aston Reese on waivers. He's going to be taking that fourth line spot that's just opened up. And then they have Dylan Gambrell as the spare 13th forward. Rolling 13 forward, 8 defensemen, and 2 goalies, which again, unsurprising. But what I do want to talk about today is, and this might turn into a bit of a J Rants episode, but the line combinations to me don't make a ton of sense, for a handful of reasons, which we'll get into. We'll take them kind of one by one. We'll talk about the forwards first, and then we'll talk about the defensemen. I have much more issue with the defensemen than I do the forwards, which again we'll get to that in a little bit here. But the practice lines this week have been, since obviously losing Jenner, losing Voronkov, bringing in Kevin Labanc and Zach Aston Reese, Chinakhov, Monahan, Marchenko as the top line, JVR, Fantilli, Labanc as the second line, Pucher, Sillinger, Johnson as the third line, and then Aston Reese, Corrali, Olivier, and then Dylan Gambrell rotating in on that fourth line. There are a couple of changes I would make here. First of all, putting Chinakhov up on that top line is I don't hate it, but it is a confusing move to me because I don't know that Chinakhov really stood out in the preseason. I don't think he was bad, but obviously they needed to bump someone up to that top line, and I don't understand why it's Chinakhov over someone like Johnson, who excelled at basically every single position. He was good on the power play, he was good on the penalty kill, he was great 5-on-5. And yet somehow he remains stuck in the third line. But we'll get into that in a minute. Like, I don't hate Chinakhov and Marchenko have good chemistry. I don't know that having like 2 almost pure shooters on the same top line is going to be a great idea, because like they can really, there's only one puck to be shot at a time, So I personally would have split up the scoring. I would have moved Chinakhov down the lineup. I probably would have put him on the second line, frankly. But Chinakhov, Monahan, Marchenko in a as a line that exists in a vacuum, I don't hate it. As a line that exists, if you're trying to get the best out of this lineup, I don't know that putting Chinakhov and Marchenko together is the best idea. And then we have to talk about putting Van Riemsdyk with Fantilli and also putting Labanc with Fantilli, which is putting 2 middle 6 veterans with ostensibly your first line center, which he's not the first line center. Monahan is the first line center, but Fantilli probably should be. I don't know that JVR and Fantilli worked particularly well together in the preseason. I'm willing to kind of curb my expectations, or like, I'm willing to give Kevin Labanc the benefit of the doubt for the first little bit. We haven't seen him with any of these players. We don't know what works, what doesn't. There's every reason to think that he might succeed in this role. The offense was never in question with Labanc. The fact that he is a defensive liability is what's in question. And I don't know that putting him on a line with guys at JVR and Adam Fantilli, neither of whom are particularly defensively minded, is the best idea in the world. I feel like that line is probably going to concede a lot, which I don't think is not great for your second line. Again, a line that I don't really dislike in a vacuum, but when you look at who you could put with Fantilli, again, it's slim pickings, especially with Jenna gone, especially with Voronkov out, losing Line A. Brindley is injured, obviously Goodrow. They've gone from having a lot of very good wingers to suddenly having two good wingers. So, LeBank's got to play somewhere. I personally would not have put him on the second line. Or if I did, I wouldn't have both JVR and LeBanc on the second line. That feels very much like, well, they're good veterans, so we'll give them the benefit of the doubt. And I don't know that's what's best for Fantilli specifically. Third line, again, in a vacuum, don't have a problem with it. I think Pucher, Sillinger, Johnson is going to be a fun line. Obviously, Pucher, I think, has shown flashes of being really quite good throughout the preseason. He played in 7 of 8 preseason games, former 4th-round pick. So to get any success from him at all, I think, is a real win. Sillinger and Johnson obviously have really good chemistry together. That line might be better than the second line, despite the fact that Fantilli is a much better center than Sillinger. Honestly, what I might do is flip Fantilli and Sillinger and then have Pucher, Fantilli, Johnson as the second line, and then have JVR, Sillinger, LeBanc as a third line. So I'm going to be really interested to see what the ice time split is like. For the first couple of games, they might do the opening game on Thursday might be a complete tire fire, and they might throw everything away and start from scratch again. Dean Evason has talked a lot, has talked a big game this preseason of this training camp about how he has no prior, knowledge is the wrong word, but he has no, prior biases of, oh, well, these guys played together last season, these guys played together and it didn't work, whatever. I don't know that he's quite put his money where his mouth is, because he did say that he was going to try a bunch of different things and then basically proceeded to staple the top 6 together, until he was forced to change it by the Jenner injury. But it is what it is. Bottom 6 is the bottom 6. I like the addition of Zach Aston Reese. I talked about it yesterday. I think Aston Reese, Corelli, and Olivier is going to be a line that is probably pretty tough to play against, which, frankly, that's all I ask for from a fourth line. If you can get, between 5 and 10 goals out of... Okay, Zach Aston Reese is probably not going to score between 5 and 10 goals. If you can get 20, let's put some numbers on this. If you can get 25 goals total out of that fourth line, to me, that feels like a rousing success. Mostly I don't want the line to concede every time they step on the ice, which is kind of what happened a little bit last season. So don't hate the fourth line. Don't hate the third line. The top 6 could use some tweaks. The thing is, here is what I would do with the lines. Is I would put Johnson with Monahan and Marchenko. I think Johnson has enough similarities in his game with Goodrow that he and Monahan should click. I think Johnson and Marchenko work well together, and that is a really good transition, start offense, finish offense line. Marchenko's going to put the puck in the net. Monahan and Johnson are going to get him the puck. And you won't have a case of, which is what I suspect will happen with Jiricek and Marchenko, which is that they will both be trying to shoot the same puck. And you could only shoot one puck at one particular time, So I would put Johnson on that top line, and then I would have probably Chinakhov, Fantilli, LeBanc on the second line. I would take LeBanc over JVR just because I think, LeBanc is a little bit younger. LeBanc has more offense to his game. JVR is going to be good on the power play, and I think when you get to, 35 years old or however old he is, limiting his minutes and giving him more favorable minutes, I feel like should be what you start to do with players like that, unless, they are freaks of nature like Sidney Crosby, who is putting up, 100-point seasons at the age of 35. But, you're going to get a better JVR if you play him less, and I suspect what's going to happen is he's actually going to play more, and it's going to impact his game. Similarly to what we saw, not last season, but the season before with Gabranson, which is he was playing like 24 minutes a game on average and was really, really suffering for it because A, he was playing too much, and B, he was playing against opponents that were way better than him. And that was partially because everyone was injured and he kind of de facto became a top pairing defenseman. And partially just because Pascal Vincent decided that he and Provorov were like the guys to play in every situation, which is what it is. It's fine. We've moved on. And then, obviously, I'll put JVR on the third line. I would do Puccisil into JVR, and then I would keep that fourth line intact, which, if the fourth line is the only one that you don't want to tweak, that feels like an indictment of the top three lines as opposed to the fourth line, you know? So, we'll see. Maybe it'll work out. Maybe I will be completely wrong, you know? And I was talking to a friend about this the other day. Like, obviously, we are all allowed to have, like, opinions and stuff. Like, that's kind of this whole gig, is me having opinions. Am I going to sit here and pretend that I know more about, like, who's working well together in practice and things like that than the head coach who is ostensibly there day in, day out, watching, analyzing, watching video, talking to his assistants? Like, do I agree with what he's done? No. Do I accept that potentially he might know more than me in this situation? Yes. That being said, if we're at this time next week and the Blue Jackets haven't won a game yet and they're getting destroyed in the analytics side and also in the eye test side, then maybe, hey, Dean, we'll have to have a conversation. But as of right now, I'm kind of willing to give him the benefit of the doubt when it comes to the forwards, at least. We're going to talk about the defenseman in a minute, and I am unwilling to give him the benefit of the doubt here because I have opinions, and they are many, which we'll talk about in just a second here on Locked On Blue Jackets. First, I've got to tell you about FanDuel, because you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. It's America's #1 sportsbook for a reason. When you place your first $5 bet, you're going to get $200 in bonus bets, guaranteed. You don't have to win or lose that $5 bet. You can bet it on literally whatever you want. If you want to put money on, I don't know, the Browns winning a game, or if you want to put money on the Chiefs winning the Super Bowl. Like, one of those things is super likely. One of those things is super unlikely. It doesn't matter. Win or lose, $200 in bonus bets. And if you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the little stats. You can view live play-by-play and so much more on that very same page where you place your bet. So you don't have to go clicking around and trying to find, like, what the numbers line is or who's playing well or anything. You have all of the information right where you need it to be, and then it's click of a button and you can put $5 on whatever you want. All you're going to do is go to FanDuel.com, place a $5 bet, and you're going to get started with $200 in bonus bets if that $5 bet is your first with FanDuel. Once again, that's FanDuel.com, America's #1 sportsbook. Welcome back to Locked On Blue Jackets. We're talking about the confusing line combinations. And you know, I've talked through what I would do. I've talked through why I don't love what's happening with the forwards. Let's talk about the defenseman, which is where I have the biggest issue right now. And my biggest issue is 37-year-old Jack Johnson. But we'll get to that in a second. So here are the lines, or the combinations, the defense pairings. That's the words I'm looking for. Top line, we've got Werenski with Provorov, who is a left defenseman playing on the right side, which I thought they were moving him over to make room for Matejchuk. Apparently not. You've got Christensen and Severson on that second pairing, and then you've got Jack Johnson and Eric Gabranson on the third pairing. On the outside looking in is Jordan Harris and David Jiricek, which feels like such a massive malpractice to me. I get it. You want to put Eric Gabranson in the lineup. He's a good leader. You're paying him $4 million. He was good last season. I was talking to a friend, and she said that he's playing the Brandon Dubinsky role of the team at the minute, which totally understand. Again, doesn't do a lot in the lineup necessarily, but is a really great guy in the room, is a good leader, is a veteran, all of that, you know, good quote-unquote intangibles that you get with a guy who is, you know, in his early to mid 30s. Why is Jack Johnson in the top 6 of this team? Why are you putting Jack Johnson above Jordan Harris and David Jiricek? Like, if you had to put him above one of them, fine, whatever. But the fact that they are both the odd men out at the minute feels like, and I said malpractice earlier, and that was maybe a bit of a strong word, but like that feels like such a mismanagement. Nothing I have seen from Jack Johnson in the preseason has made me think that he deserves a top 6 role, And I talked about this a little bit over the summer when they signed him. I was like, yeah, he's a good veteran. He'll be good for the kids if he plays, 15 minutes a night for 20 games a season or 25 games a season. Great. He's not going to be an abject disaster on the ice. Like, he's been around long enough. He knows the game. He's just not fast enough to get there, and he's not skilled enough to really make an impact. But he knows enough that I feel like he could probably avoid, again, actively dying on the ice, or his game dying on the ice, I should say. Putting him in over guys like Harris and Jiricek, and also, like, we could argue till the cows come up about Matejchuk. He is going to tear the AHL up. He is going to be the very first call when the inevitable injuries start coming through. And I'm going to knock on wood here. I am shocked that we haven't seen a defenseman injury yet. It's been all forwards. I'm pretty sure all of the defensemen are healthy. Knock on wood. How you put Jack Johnson in specifically over Jordan Harris, who I thought was pretty damn excellent in the preseason. Wasn't flashy, obviously didn't put the points up, but was such a calming influence on the game that, like, I watched, like, I think one period of him play, and I was like, I see what Montreal fans loved about him. He does what Johnson does, but better and calmer, and also he's younger. He's faster, smarter. He's better than Jack Johnson in basically all of the ways, except Jack Johnson has 1,100 games of NHL experience, and I guess that's what counts in this game, which does make me feel insane. Jiricek, I get him being on the outside looking in. I don't love it. I don't necessarily agree with it, but I understand it. I thought he had a really up and down preseason. Some games he was good, some games he was bad. I do think that, again, that was really dependent on pairings. I feel like the games he was bad were the ones where he was paired with guys, again, like Jack Johnson. But I thought that, like, his best game was when he was paired with Jordan Harris. So, like, again, this is not how any of this is going to happen, but my thoughts for defensive deployment is I would do Werenski, Severson, I would do Harris, Jiricek, and I would do Christiansen, Gabranson. Which I get leaves Provorov on the outside looking in. They're not going to do that, but if you're going to play, if you're having so much trouble, like, if you're moving your one of your, like, 2 half-decent left defensemen to the right side to sit your other half-decent left defenseman, we're not including Werenski in this, because obviously he is a step above the rest, but if you're moving him to the right side to make room for someone, and that room that someone you're making room for is Jack Johnson, like, that feels to me like a real problem. And the forwards I understand, because the forwards, you're kind of making the best of a bad situation. We've talked about the guys that they've lost due to injury, due to trade, due to, circumstances outside of their control. They are doing what they can by piecing together a roster that is subpar up top. You have no excuse with your defensemen to not put the best 6 defensemen on the ice. And if you're playing both Jack Johnson and Eric Branson at the expense of guys like Harris and Jiricek, you're simply not putting your best 6 defensemen on the ice. Like, baffling to me, And it could be a case of Johnson and Gabranson are the 4th pairing defenseman rotating in. Gabranson missed the last little bit of the preseason with a minor lower body injury, I believe. So, and again, we're gonna, I talked about how all the defensemen are healthy. He was not technically unhealthy, but I don't know that he was 100% either. So this could all be the case of, well, Harris and Jiricek are the 3rd pairing. Johnson and Gabranson are on the outside looking in while Gabranson gets back up to speed. We'll find out when they release the actual 20-man roster for Thursday's game. If they put Johnson and Gabranson on the ice, well, if you put them on the ice together, that's going to be a disaster. Every other team in the league is going to make that defensive pairing pay. Second, it feels like a bad idea. Sitting, and especially you gave up Patrick Laine and a second-round pick for Jordan Harris, and you're telling me that he can't crack the lineup? To me, that's like, well, then why did you bother trading for him? And I understand that they had to not get rid of, but Laine wanted out. Again, made the best of a bad situation. I liked bringing Harris in, but if you bring him in to sit him, like, what are we even doing here? Like, it is, and I know that Don Waddell is probably medium involved in kind of lineup decision, things like that. I don't know how hands-on he is. By all accounts, he is mostly a supervisory role and like is there for advice as opposed to, saying we want this guy in the lineup, we don't want this guy in the lineup, we want this guy to play high, we want this guy to get a better opportunity, send this guy to Cleveland, etc., etc., etc. But if you trade for a guy and you give up a guy like Patrick Laine, you trade for a guy like Jordan Harris, and then you sit him, that I don't know, it doesn't make sense to me. I can't see a world in which Jack Johnson outperforms Jordan Harris or David Jiricek or Denta Matejchuk. Like, he could maybe outperform one of them. There is no world in which he outperforms all three of them, and it's gonna be an intensely frustrating watch. That pairing specifically is gonna be really, really frustrating to watch. And I don't think there's really any excuse. Like, again, we talked about how Gabranson and Andrew Peak was like the top defense pairing a couple of seasons ago, but that's because literally everyone was injured. There was no Provorov, there was no Severson. Werenski was out for the season. Anna Boquist was always injured. Jake Bean was done for the season. Like, it was Gabranson, it was Andrew Peak, and then it was like 4 guys with collectively 20 games of NHL experience. Like, I understand that defense looking awful. If this defense looks awful, then there's really no excuse because you have the talent to deploy, and for some reason you're not deploying it. So we'll see how it goes. Again, maybe they will surprise me. I am not counting on it. I am expecting this team to be interesting to watch. I would love them to be fun to watch, but I don't know that we're going to get fun necessarily. I would also take watchable as an option. I don't think this team is going to be good, but I would love to get from the kind of the miserable defensive efforts that we saw last season to, oh, hey, semi-competent. We love to see it. So we'll kind of wrap everything up in a second. We'll talk about, is my cautious optimism for this season starting to take a little bit of a downward turn? We'll talk about that in a second here on Locked On Blue Jackets. First, I'm going to tell you about Indeed. We're all driven by the search for better, but when it comes to hiring, the best way to search for a candidate isn't to search at all. Don't search, match with Indeed. If you need to hire, you need Indeed. They're your matching and hiring platform with over 350 million global monthly visitors, according to Indeed data, and a matching engine that helps you find quality candidates fast. And you can use Indeed for your scheduling, your screening, and your messaging. You don't have to play phone tag. You don't have to play email tag. You can connect with those candidates faster, and it's not just faster with Indeed. 93% of employers agree that Indeed delivers highest quality matches, not just the fastest ones compared to other job sites. I have not used Indeed to hire, but I have used it to job hunt, and I loved doing it. As much as you can love, looking for a job. But it's the only job hunting site that I used. I tried a bunch of them. Indeed was the best one, and so it's the one that I went back to over and over again. So join more than 3.5 million businesses worldwide that use Indeed to hire great talent fast. And listeners of this show are going to get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/lockedon. Just go to Indeed.com/lockedon right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Indeed.com/lockedon. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? You need Indeed. All right, let's finish off because I feel like I have been banging the optimism drum. I mean, I was banging it all season and have kind of slowed down with the banging of the optimism drum in recent weeks for, varied and obvious reasons, like losing Gaudreau sucked on all levels, losing Jenner is not great on a hockey level. Losing Voronkov is not great on a hockey level. He had a really great rookie season last year, was set to take another step forward this year. The line combinations do not fill me with optimism. I am not going to count this team out until they are down and out for the count. You know, like we talk about it all the time. You could basically see what playoff teams are there by American Thanksgiving. So this team has what, 6-ish weeks, 5-ish weeks to show us who they are. If they're not in a playoff spot on American Thanksgiving, probably I will wash my hands of the optimism and we will start on our prep for next year's draft. There are a lot of good prospects. I don't know if there's a Celebrini in there, but hey, there could be a real gem. If you can get, another piece like another Fantilli, another Lindstrom or whatever to add to it, you keep going. Anyway, I am reluctant to write this team off for a couple of reasons. One is that Dean Evason has that kind of John Tortorella energy of he tends to, I think, make a roster more than the sum of its parts. I think he got more success in Minnesota than his roster decreed, and I wouldn't be surprised to see him get more out of this roster than people expect. It's a weak roster. We know this. It was always going to be, you were never going to be able to, you were already never going to be able to replace Patrick Laine on this roster. And then since then, you lose Gaudreau unexpectedly. You lose Jenner, who's good for, 20, 25 goals a season. Voronkov could have hit 20 goals this season and had turned into, an excellent middle six player. Lots going on in terms of this roster was never going, as more things happen and more things come out, there's no way to look at this roster. And I don't think there's a way to construct this roster to make it look like a playoff team, But one thing that I've already kind of talked about is the Dean Evason of it all. I think I wouldn't be surprised if he manages to turn this roster into, if not a playoff roster, then a better roster than we expect. And this is again, not an intangible necessarily. I guess it is. We don't know how this team is going to play all season long because grief is weird and makes no sense. And some nights it's great and some nights it's terrible and you don't know how you're going to put your skates on and go out there. The opening night is going to be a tough night. The home opener, which is on Monday night, is also going to be a really tough night, and I feel like we don't. This team could come out balls to the wall, hell for leather, and just take other teams by storm. Because hockey is weird, and sometimes if you're playing for a cause, you can kind of create magic. That being said, I also wouldn't be surprised if the other way happens. To kind of not to compare this tragedy to a separate tragedy, but when the Nottingham Panthers of the UK lost a player during a game, I think they won 3, maybe 4 games for the rest of the season. Understandable. The hearts weren't in it. They were traumatized. They were grieving. It sucks. I don't know yet which way this roster is going to go. Almost everyone on this roster knew Gaudreau, and everyone knew of him. If they hadn't worked with him, then they had played against him, or they had coached against him, or they had, they knew someone that had played with Gaudreau, or they knew someone that knew Gaudreau. Hockey's a small world, and every single person I think has been affected by this. And there's no way to know which players are going to take this grief and make it into something, and make it into a victory, and which players are going to take this grief and struggle with it. And there's no right way to do it. I'm not going to sit here and be like, if these players struggle because they're sad, then that's unacceptable. No, it's perfectly acceptable, and also it's expected. I don't know what I would do if someone that I saw every day for 2 or 3 years at work disappeared suddenly, and then you have to go back to work, and he's not there, but all of the memories of him are still there. His jersey is hanging up in the locker room. They're going to be wearing patches and helmet stickers, and they might end up putting his jersey in the rafters. All of these memories and things like that. I genuinely don't know, and I don't think we will know until we get to see them actually play in meaningful games. I don't know which way this team is going to go. So my optimism has dipped, yes, but I'm not going to sit here and say, season's over, it's a write-off. we'll have that conversation after American Thanksgiving. I still don't think this is a playoff team. I don't know that this is like, as some people on Twitter have been saying, worst team in NHL history that won't win 10 games. The worst team in NHL history won 8 games out of 82, I believe, or 8 games out of 76, something like that. It was the expansion Washington Capitals. The Blue Jackets will not be that bad. I am kind of penciling them in at, man, it would be nice to get between 30 and 40 wins. That would be great. Plus, the inevitable overtime pity points. But like, if you can get 30 to 40 wins with this roster, I feel like that's acceptable to me. 40 wins is probably not a playoff team, but again, my hope for this season before all of this horrible news happened was that this team would be in contention for a wild card and probably fall short. My hope was that they would draft someone between 10th and 16th overall. So, like, I still kind of would love that. I think they're probably going to be closer to 10th than to 16th. But again, we don't know how this team is going to react to playing with a heavy heart when the games mean something. So I am going to remain cautiously optimistic until the team shows me otherwise. And maybe that's stupid of me, but what can I say? I always want the best. I always want to believe in the best for this team. And they haven't delivered in recent years, but hey, maybe this year they will, Tomorrow we are going to do a full kind of season preview. We'll talk about where I expect them to finish. We'll talk about points. We'll talk about like who's going to lead the team in scoring. Is there going to be any surprises? Who needs to step up? Who's going to have a breakout season? All of that stuff. We'll talk about that on tomorrow's episode. Thank you for listening to this episode, for making it your first listen of the day every single day. Locked On Blue Jackets is free and available on all podcast platforms, over on YouTube and on SiriusXM. You can find me on Twitter at _Jacob Foster, JAKOBFORSDER. You can find the show at LO_Blue Jacket. If you have comments, questions, criticisms, you can email me at lockdownbluejackets@gmail.com. And thank you once again for listening. Until tomorrow, make sure you stay locked on.